Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to Cybersecurity and Maritime, a webinar presented by Strategic Planning Partners. My name is Todd, and I lead the research and development team here at SPP. And with me, I have 4 speakers, each with a diverse skill set and a distinguished professional history. I'll start with Pete Samus. Pete is the founder of SPP. He is also a retired Coast Guard captain, and he has 40 years of experience in marine safety and maritime homeland security mission fields. Frank McGinty is a master mariner with 40 years of experience in the maritime industry. He's also a safety management systems expert. John Chambers is a cyber engineer, and Jeff Jennings is a chief information security officer, and both of them bring decades of distinguished professional careers to the table. I'll let them introduce themselves in a little bit more depth in a minute if they would like, but before that, I'm going to run through our agenda. We'll start with a brief speaker introduction and an overview of who SPP is, what we've done, and what we offer. Then we'll move into a discussion of convergence, what convergence is, why it's increasing in significance, and how it will change the way we approach security, especially in maritime spaces. Following that, we'll address the regulatory intent associated with the International Maritime Organization, better known as the IMO, their new CRM requirements as of this month. Next, we'll discuss today's cyber landscape, give an overview of the NIST cybersecurity framework, and go over next steps. We'll tie it off with a question and answer section. Some of you have actually asked questions upon registration to this event. However, if you have not and you would still like to ask, there will be a window open for you to anonymously submit questions near the tail end of the webinar. We have a lot to discuss in a very short window, so this presentation will move pretty fast. There will, however, be a recording of this presentation available shortly after we wrap up, and any questions that we don't get to in the question and answer period will be addressed in a follow-up email.
Okay, thanks, Todd. Appreciate the introduction. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for your time today. We've got a lot of material to cover, so we'll try and work through it as quickly as possible. I'm going to kick off and talk about the company just a little bit, our services, and the way in which we've designed our program, tie together different operational aspects in the new cyber risk management domain. So in terms of the company itself, started in 2005. We're initially focused on assisting maritime entities comply with new post 9/11 operational security planning and training initiatives. The company's mission itself was to join operational security experts with technology engineers and safety management folks for engagement in complex, technologically driven operating environments. Really, what we try to do is provide opportunities to streamline security and safety programs in taking this approach. In terms of industries we served, as I said, in the beginning, we were put together, focused on maritime. Since then, we've branched into several different verticals, several different industry verticals. Over the years, we've assembled and managed physical information security and training programs for corporate, education, healthcare, transportation sectors, and also government security agencies, both here in the U.S. and in the Middle East. Several services that we offer, obviously, on the technical side, the technical team will get into that as we work through the conversation and correlate services to, individual program components that you're up against and, assessing and assembling. We offer security advisory services, which is important at the beginning as folks try and get their arms around how to prioritize programs, make investments, and build out a long-term, mature cybersecurity program. Of course, following that, together with that are risk and compliance assessment services. As you get down the road, incident response services, are critical. Once everything's in place and you do, experience a breach or a problem, how do you respond to that incident and recover? Along those lines, penetration testing and adversarial simulation services to get into your systems and point out weak areas, collaborate on areas that need mitigation and, and improvement. And then, training is a significant piece for us, particularly up front as new cyber programs are implemented, in addition to assessing where you are and laying out some early initial controls and protocol to train your staff is of paramount importance. So last year, as we circled back to maritime cyber, with the advent of new regulations in 2020, we put together a program that we call CySPAR, developed specifically for compliance with new maritime cyber risk management regulations. The CySPAR model integrates SPP team members, experts in physical security, physical tactical security, safety management, and of course technology, for the creation of new policies and procedures. In terms of how we specifically approach a project, we map requirements, technology requirements, NIST requirements. We'll map each individual requirement to a specific task, that's required for your organization to put together a plan, both short-term and long-term. And then once that's done, once those pieces are mapped, then obviously one of the ultimate products is a procedural doc, understandable for operators, for folks, the field level folks, whether they're, shipboard, shoreside in a facility. But, in our opinion, that's one of the most critical pieces in this, in addition to the plans and the mitigation pieces. It's that protocol, easily understandable, executable, deployable procedures for your organization to understand and implement when things happen. If you go to the convergence slide, next slide. So for us, convergence, it means, and you'll hear this term, I think, more and more often as you work down the road. Obviously, cyber impacts several different facets of maritime operations, both on the, legacy security side, looking at, physical security attributes of your operations, even basic security technology. So the convergence piece is for us to, in terms of the way that our team is put together and approaches your project, like I say, those three components, safety, security, and cyber, to come together in a single team and look at a broad piece of your operation, for the formulation of improvements and plans going forward. Cybersecurity processes impact both sides, in terms of strategic planning development. So, company officers, operational personnel, executive level personnel within each program area will need to engage in cyber risk management planning and execution. We believe that there is value in integrating these processes, obviously, within each individual, client operation, with an eye towards syncing program elements and compliant state milestones down the road. That means the more that you can look at, assess, and assemble with a single team, we believe the more effective those controls are, because they take into account components of each different operation. And over time, will save you time and money in assembling, and especially in maintaining these programs going down the road. So in terms of conducting initial cyber assessments, shipboard and shoreside assessment processes are really identical in nature. Regulations to include technology in assessing risk, it's been in place for a long time. The requirement's always been there. With the advent of cyber breaches that we'll get into in further detail, obviously the guidance and the focus on the network digital security side, the cybersecurity aspects are highlighted now, and obviously is what we're here to talk about today. We're focusing, SVP's focusing on integrating annual safety and security assessment activities within the same effort, as I've said. We definitely believe there's value in synchronizing these programs. CRM assessment and awareness training are probably initially one of the most essential considerations in the process. Once these are complete, once these initial assessment, training, and mitigation steps are complete early on, then companies can engage on prioritizing program steps in which to achieve longer term, what the industry calls cyber maturity. In terms of cyber risk management program development, specifically for us for the CySPAR program, the technical program mapping. We believe that's necessary to map elements of NIST to each specific CRM action. The ultimate goal is to achieve and maintain hardened IT and OT alongside cyber protocols and procedures. It's really of paramount importance for each individual in the organization at whatever level to understand their roles in performing routine daily operations. The CySPAR model itself is a phased approach. I've talked about the short term, but really over the long term, particularly when companies are trying to get their arms around the requirements and how to invest and strategize actions, we believe that a phased approach is appropriate and effective. As I said, CySPAR is built specifically that way. The first phase is focused on initial preparation and basic control implementation to start longer term programming. The phase one really primarily consists of assessment, some basic testing mechanisms within your networks, depending upon the complexity of your technology, and some monitoring, basic monitoring to indicate problems or vulnerabilities. The second phase is focused on establishing governance protocol, obviously, and organizational prep, including formal CRM policy development and response planning. And then the third and final phase focused on long-term program maintenance, obviously, continuous improvement, including ongoing asset management and training, and an investment in strategy, probably, most of all, of great importance for folks to figure out what these things are going to cost, specifically what's required and what's not required. Todd, would you go to the next slide, please? So in terms of regulatory intent, in embarking upon new programming for CRM, we believe it's necessary to understand not only the content of the new cyber regs, but really the intent or the reality behind them. Obviously a switch isn't thrown upon, the initiation of a new requirement. It takes time for operations to assess where they are, formulate early actions, and then, come up with a more robust approach. Obviously, the new mandates for 2021 are far-reaching and are going to impact virtually the entire industry. Consistent with Coast Guard regulations, IMO management standards, the ISM Code, ISPS Code, stakeholders are primarily guided by safety and security of ships, facilities, and people, and then other related property and the protection of the environment, really in that order. A cyber risk management program is similar to many processes that make up a marine management system. Vessel response plans, life-saving appliances manuals, fire safety training manuals, fire safety operational booklets, security plans, damage control booklets, etc. Provide resources, procedures, training, qualified person support, record occurrences, and correct and make improvements going down the road. The 5 NIST framework functions are explained and will be explained in great detail as we go through this webinar, broken into 5 areas: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recovers, if that sounds familiar. So since the ISM and ISPS are inextricably linked, one must understand the regulation, regulators, and any interpretations that have become accepted over time to determine how the CRM program will be managed, really in a marine safety management system. Generally, if you want everyone and anyone to be able to use it, it's going to be in the safety management system. If it must be protected, because much of this will be sensitive security information, usually records, not procedures, must be controlled by your security program. In essence, you would really like a cybersecurity specialist in building your programs out to be guided by a safety management system expert. We believe that's of paramount importance, and we spent a lot of time and effort in designing this program this way. So Frank McGinty's on board, experienced Mariner and Safety Management Systems expert with Safety Management Systems LLC, to talk about how all this is managed in regulated safety management systems. Frank, over to you.
And next was going to get into the next slide with talking about, regulatory timelines for implementation of a cyber risk management system. Basically, within the U.S., the U.S. Coast Guard initially came out with an NAVIC, to require the NAVIC 120 to require that you actually are implementing 33 CFR 105 and 106, which in their inception in 2004 included already basically cyber risk management. It just was not termed that same way. Similarly, when all of this was being thought about in 2017, the OCIMF required their tanker operators to implement a cyber risk management program prior to their SIRE inspections. Same time, the IMO had approved their basic annex resolution MSC 42898, which required a cyber risk management system implemented within your safety management system. And that's going to be tested in 2021 during your annual document of compliance audits. So hence IMO calls it IMO 2021, and that's generally what they're referring to. So the U.S. Coast Guard has addressed, non-ISM required, vessels and companies to implement this when they issued their CBC Work Instruction 027, which basically covers items of the cyber risk management program that they want their inspectors looking at when they're on board and when they're, doing all of their inspections. So the CRM program elements, basically it's updating your safety environmental protection policy to include, risks posed by cyber accesses, an inventory of your internet technology systems and your operational technology systems and how those are supported. Then you identify your shipboard systems that incorporate critical equipment and how that can possibly be affected with cyber risks. That includes a hardware inventory, a software inventory, map data flows, implement secure configurations for all the hardware, security log procedures for access to critical systems, training, and then physical security on top of that. Then generally perform the following CRM activities, which our technical experts will further, detail later on, but prove the reliability of the IT and the OT equipment, develop CRM emergency response procedures, identify cyber deficiencies and corrective actions, deploy resources to monitor company cyber risk, incorporate CRM into the company's internal audit process. So, and basically from a, that'll be the next slide. You need responsibilities and training. Obviously, this is going to be, take the personnel who are actually operating the systems and the facilities and running the ships are going to need to be trained to, cyber awareness, to understand how their systems can be affected. And basically, it's going to require the company to identify, third-party IT engineers and, persons who can assist them as they're basically implementing their cyber risk management program. So this will require training, and it's going to be a new component of your safety management system that is going to just specifically to address these new threats and as they come on board. Generally, I guess I'd like to turn it over now to John and Jeff for talk about the technical components.
Thank you, Frank.
Thanks, Frank.
So, hello, everybody, and thank you for attending this morning's session. So, just briefly, my name is John Chambers. Been in the industry since, I hate to say it, but since about 1998 from a cybersecurity standpoint, helping clients throughout the years since 1998. So my presentation will be about 4 or 5 slides. We'll get into, go back, please. This slide represents really the history, the evolution of what we've been seeing with respect to cybersecurity. These labels are all very recognizable, and candidly, we could probably fill up a slide deck of just breaches within the last 6 months. But you see Target, you see Home Depot, you see one of the most recent significant ones listed in SolarWinds. These breaches, these attacks, these issues have been happening for a long time. So in the early 2000s, late 90s, if you were charting this, you would see a lot of the stuff that was happening was really more destruction, defacing of websites, things like that. And if you charted the times were happening were after 3 o'clock, right? So a lot of it was just kids innocently or being destructive and so forth. And so what's happened since that time has been the sophistication and the evolution of the miscreants, right? And we could talk about the different types of attacks and so forth, but really, the TJX breach back, and then Target were really a couple of the first significant breaches that set the strategy for the bad guys to go forward with. So you look at each one of these. JP Morgan Chase, very, very creative in the attack on JP Morgan Chase. We see the Maersk for the maritime industry. We see SolarWinds, and I should mention SolarWinds. I'm not sure if people are familiar with this particular attack, but this came out couple of months ago, or was discovered several months ago. And the SolarWinds concern is significant. It's significant across every industry. SolarWinds is a product that manages companies' networks and the assets that they have on their networks. The miscreants, the bad guys, were able to plant malware into call it the golden image for SolarWinds that really got into their supply chain. And this has propagated out to over 18,000 clients across many, many different industries. So if you may be sitting there saying, I'm not concerned because I don't use SolarWinds, but you should be concerned because you need to look at your third party vendors. If they use SolarWinds, there's a good chance that there should be some concern there, right? So it's important to take it upon yourself to do your due diligence to understand, because this was a significant impact to the industry. But all these other labels represent, the message that, we've been going at this for a long time, right? And it just seems like for the more investments that we make, for the for the the monies that go into protecting each organization. It almost seems like we're losing the battle because these attacks just keep becoming more sophisticated and so forth. And one of the reasons is because the miscreants have all the time in the world, and if you're a targeted attack, they're going to really find a way to get in, right? So you cannot take a preventative approach anymore. You need to be looking at it as assuming that they're already in some way, shape, or form, but taking the steps to detect it and to know that you have a sound cybersecurity program in place that will mitigate the risk, right? So in any case, though, this is an important slide because the underlining message here is that cybersecurity has to become a cultural thing within every organization. Every industry is at risk. Every company is at risk, whether you're large, whether you're medium, or whether you're small. And it really needs to start. Cybersecurity needs to become a cultural thing and starting at the boardroom. Next slide, please. So just some more statistics. This information is about a year old now, but it comes from a very good source. If you're not familiar with CSO Online, please bookmark it. But a few of the things I'd like to point out is when you look at this information, and this number changes depending on what you read, it could be as high as 95%. But the second bullet, where it states that it's 80%, greater than 80% of reported security incidents are caused by phishing attacks, right? So, like I said, I've seen that at over 90%, right? But the point is that people are clicking on stuff. People are the weakest link in the cybersecurity chain. So that needs to be taken into account as we build out, programs and create security awareness programs. The other thing I'd like to point out is 60% of most of breaches that we know about involved vulnerabilities where a patch was available but not applied. So if you go back to the ransomware attacks of a few years ago, most of those could have been avoided if the latest patches by the manufacturers were applied. Now, it's not always easy to get patches out as quickly as need be, but statistics don't lie, right? So these are best practices. These are good practices to follow. And then the attacks on the IT/OT devices have tripled in the first half of 2019, and you can say that that's probably quadrupled since the statistic was published. Next slide, please. And with COVID, next slide. So with COVID, you need to be aware of what happened and how everything from a cybersecurity standpoint just became that much more dramatic and intense with the advent of COVID. So COVID has forced every organization to revisit and completely readopt strategies on the fly. And so, with that said, the hackers, the categories of different miscreants out there have been busy, have been hard at work, taking advantage, excuse me, of the COVID landscape these days, right? So, we used to say that a customer's DMARC was at where they connected to the internet, but in this day and age, that separation is really from the remote worker's driveway at this point, because, if they're working from home, you have 20,000 people working from home, your organization is only as good as the steps that are being taken for proper cyber hygiene at that organizational, DMARC, which is mostly in this case, homes and remote offices at home, right? So from a maritime standpoint, just one thing I like to point out is there's been about a 400% spike in cyber attacks in maritime during the pandemic. And this comes from a trusted source, Naval Dome, an Israeli organization. So COVID has just really added more fuel to the fire when it comes to looking at the cyber landscape and trying to get our arms around it. So not intended to scare, but intended to show the impact, because we talk to customers every day, every week, and some customers have a healthy paranoia, and some customers are very well along their journey from a cybersecurity standpoint. But the customers who sit back and say they're not interested in me, I'm too small, or they're not interested in me, take note, because they are interested in you. Next slide, please. And then just another stat. So again, this is Naval Dome statistics, but we see that when we look back over the last 3 years, we could see how it's really amping up from a maritime industry standpoint. So next slide. Yeah. Next slide. So this slide delves into the numbers a little bit more, right? So again, source being Naval Dome here, we saw in 2017 we had approximately 50 significant OT attacks that were reported, and in 2018 those numbers went to 120 that were reported. In 2019 to 310 attacks reported, and then in 2020. And this information was not to December 31st. So up to the point of this cutoff, there were over 500 OT major incidents that were reported. So I would also add, to draw the viewer's attention to, there's probably a lot more out there that have gone unreported, right? So, depending on the industry, depending on the organization, they may have, not gone public with this knowledge. So, but these numbers are very specific to maritime. So you can see maritime is absolutely in the crosshairs of the bad guys at this point. There's no denying that. So next slide, please. And I'm sure most people who've attended here are familiar with Safety at Sea and BIMCO. There was a survey that was conducted several months ago, and it revealed a lot of information. It's a good read. I would go and Google it and take a look. If you're interested, send a link to info@GetSPP. We'll be happy to send you the link to it. But this particular survey revealed that some of the most common attacks were, number one, phishing attacks, number two, spear phishing, and number three, malware, right? So what that tells me is that, again, they're targeting the weakest link in the cyber chain, which is the carbon life form, or the human, right? Or the employee, or the person. So, they've been very effective, and, we've been talking about this for several years now about, don't click on this, don't click on that, but yet there's still a lot of this happening. So this isn't a one and done approach, right? When it comes to security awareness training. When we talk about some of the top cybersecurity protections, we can see that security software, 77%, coupled with training. Training is ultra important. Again, it has to become cultural within an organization. You can't just say that I train my people on Monday and think that they're trained and they're going to be, now set, right? Whether they're people that, whoever comes on board ships, whoever walks into organizations, there should be a security awareness story attached to that person, right? They needed to go through some training. They needed to become aware, and it's ongoing training. And most organizations, or a lot of organizations, have adopted a security awareness program where they train, they test, they retrain, they test inside their and outside their organizations to their vendors as well. And that's shown numbers have dropped somewhat, so training is probably, in my opinion, if not the most important thing, top thing to be doing. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of information out there. When we get into the maritime space, what we've put here is we've put some guidelines and some resolutions, for reference, right? So what we see here, and I'm sure most people are very familiar with the IMO resolution 428, which is really it's really the first attempt in maritime, at least in the United States, to draw a line in the sand for organizations now, right? And so what they're saying is they're encouraging, and I will add the word highly encouraging, organizations to ensure that cyber risks are being addressed and being built into as part of a safety management program as defined. And there's guidance, and you could see what I bolded out in red here is there's a lot of strong reference to the National Institute of Standards and Technology, shortened by the NIST, shortened to NIST Cybersecurity Framework. That is one of their very strong recommendations. You can see these other guidelines in mentions here as well, right? The U.S. Coast Guard, NVIC 01-20. Again, they reference NIST very strongly, the cybersecurity framework, and the group industry, BIMCO, CLIA, a lot of good information, a lot of guidance with reference to the NIST cybersecurity framework, right? So we're going to take a quick look at what the NIST cybersecurity framework is, just as an educational standpoint. And just before I go to the next slide, NIST is a framework, right? The NIST cybersecurity framework is just that. There's a lot of other very solid, very strong frameworks and controls out there, and we do not encourage one over the other. However, the cybersecurity framework, the NIST CSF, has become the de facto standard, and it's a very, very good framework to build from. Next slide, please. All right, so just a very quick overview of what is the NIST. If you already know this, take a sip of coffee. If this is the first time or educational for you, I'm going to turn this to Jeff Jennings, who is another cybersecurity expert who's been engaged for a very long time in everything from operations to defining policy. So, Jeff?
John said that the NIST cybersecurity framework is recommended by the IMO as the guidance that they would recommend organizations in the maritime industry follow for developing a comprehensive cybersecurity program and to build that program to counter any threats an organization is faced with. The NIST framework, right? It's really a US-based standard, but it's been translated into many different languages, and it's been adopted by many organizations. It's adopted across many different industries, both in the private and public sector. And the original intent of it, though, was aimed at critical infrastructure in the U.S., right? So things like power industry, public health, telecommunications, and transportation. The original release of the NIST cybersecurity framework was released in 2014. They are now at version 1.1, which was an update that came out in 2018. Okay, the framework itself, right, is divided into three components. Those components are what they call the core, profile, and tiers. The diagram on the right is the core. Typically what NIST recommends organizations do is develop a profile of their current capability and assess their level of maturity as it stands today. And then they want you to then develop a target profile, right? What you want to achieve and where you anticipate being with your overall cybersecurity program. The core itself is a it's got these 5 functions that we are identified in the diagram there, right? Of identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. If we go and look at the next slide, it goes into a little bit more granularity, right? There's actually, along those 5 core functions there are 23 subcategories that go into much more granularity on each of the 5 major categories. It should be said that the NIST framework references other security standards that are out there, things like the ISO 27001, the critical security controls from the Center for Internet Security, CIS. As John had mentioned, these are things that SPP utilizes depending upon the different industries that we're working towards. So we have a lot of depth in the different controls that are out there. But again, with maritime, they do recommend following this NIST framework. It's a way of attacking your overall program instead of, it's developing a comprehensive solution to managing security within your organization. It's meant to be driven from a top-down approach, as opposed to, handled at, at the task level, at the individual level, in a siloed way. What the industry has come to realize is that when organizations operate in a siloed, unconnected way, there's a lot of misses on how systems can be compromised. And so that's why they recommend this overarching comprehensive view of cybersecurity. Right, and so specifically when we look at in the maritime space, and particularly on board, the different things that could be susceptible to a cybersecurity threat. We have a lot of different systems here, for instance, in your power systems, right, that can deal with fuel management or engine control, your navigation systems, your safety systems, right? These are all things now that are highly connected, typically controlled with electronics. In the past, they may not have been connected to the internet, right? They may have been what they call air-gapped, where they're, not connected to the internet or not connected to any other system. It still doesn't mean that they could not be compromised. As John had mentioned, when you have third parties that assist your organization in performing maintenance work, they could inadvertently come in as they're doing updates on your systems and introduce from their own equipment that they connect to your equipment. They could introduce some malware or infect your systems. If somebody connects a USB thumb drive that's got malware on it into one of your systems, it could infect it. And then obviously, if these systems are connected to the internet, and over the internet, people could click on a phishing email, go to a website that's got malware, and introduce that into the systems. So it used to be that these systems were isolated and not as susceptible, but the whole landscape has really changed as everything's become highly connected, and the dependence on the OT equipment is becoming more and more dependent upon internet connectivity. So again, at the end of the day, well, the IMO regulation has come out, right? It's everyone's looking to become compliant, but really that shouldn't be the ultimate goal for the organization, right? It should be how can I protect my organization from the ever burgeoning threat of cyber threats that are going on out there. As John mentioned, in some of the examples he showed, it's just increasing at an alarming rate, and some of the items in the news today are very unsettling, especially to us who've been in the industry for many years, and just seeing the sophistication of the threats and the way that they're coming at these things. So while the NIST cybersecurity framework, has a whole guidance there, some of the things that we would recommend are performing risk assessments, right? Looking at your individual systems and determining how they're connected and the risks that they're facing. Protecting both your vessels and your facilities-based systems, especially if there's some interconnectivity between them. Obviously, it's, again, having a comprehensive overall program that protects the entire organization. Can't stress enough the training of personnel and making them aware and making them all understand that they all have a part in securing an organization, and that they could be the weakest link in the chain in terms of protecting an organization. And then once you've identified those risks, you really want to go through developing a remediation process on how you can mitigate, minimize. May not necessarily be able to eliminate all of the risks, but you want to minimize and mitigate the risks faced by your organization. And then again, as John mentioned, there's this IMCO guideline on cybersecurity for onboard ships. It's a very good document for reference material on what organizations should do from identifying the threats and looking at the vulnerabilities that are faced by your organization. Because again, each organization, even though you're all, say in the maritime industry, you've got different systems, you've got different vendors that you're dealing with. So you have to look at unique vulnerabilities that are faced by your organization. Assess what the risks are, develop the protections, and then build in protection measures, and then develop a response plan. If you do get infiltrated and hacked, how do you respond from that, and how do you recover from that? So really great reference material from IMCO there. And then I'm going to turn it back here to John.
All right, thanks, Jeff. So great job in going through that. That material is as dry as toast sometimes, but I thought you did a really good job in laying out some of these emerging or de facto standards, right? So for the remaining few moments here, what I want to just so first off, Jeff made some really good points. I guess you're attending this today because you're asking the question, how to begin, where do I begin, right? And as Jeff mentioned, you really want to, put together a program or embellish the program that you already have. So where to start, you want to really assess your cyber risks, right? You want to take a look at the risks to both ships and the operations, the facilities, right? Holistically. Design a cyber architecture, right, that builds in elements of a risk management framework, as we've discussed, right? And, then implement, right? Start implementing these safeguards and so forth, right? So there is levels of expertise, that are probably listening to this webinar, right? They're, from just getting started to, very advanced. So, from a strategic planning partner standpoint, we are a partner. We engage with our clients, and our goal is very simple. We want to help to prepare and protect, organizations against cyber attacks. And what this slide represents is basically a one solution we've designed and implemented for one of our clients, and how it aligns. I think Pete had laid out CySPAR in the very beginning of this presentation, and CySPAR is the Strategic Planning Partners Maritime Program. So what we show here is one maritime customer in particular, where we've laid out different items that go across the NIST cybersecurity framework. We recognize that every organization is different. So if this was for, say, Acme Inc., the next company that will come along would not look this way. But we are basing it on, best practices and standards, right? So we can deliver this work. So for organizations that have the manpower, have the expertise, go at it. Feel free, info@getspp.com, right? Share any questions that you have on your journey to continue to mature your cybersecurity program. We'll, be happy, right, for organizations that need a helping hand. We have everything from, services, or Jeff, who is a CISO, that can, basically be a virtual CISO for any organization to help organizations start defining policy, start to interface with in their auditors, and be that cybersecurity spokesperson for the organization. So next slide, please. And then finally, my last slide here is just really tying it all together. So this is our line card. This is a list of the services that we offer in the cyber, as well as the safety management, right? So SPP has been going at this for over 15 years. We have, a very strong defense in depth of people and employees that culminate over 150 years of collective experience. Our experience goes across, it's not just limited to maritime. We've been in healthcare, we've been in manufacturing, we've been in financial services. So what we bring to every engagement is that knowledge, because there are threats out there that may not be seen in certain industries just yet, but we are on the forefront of making sure that those hacks, those attacks are top of mind, and the defenses that we help build into any organization who may not have seen those yet are there, and we can help to defend that. So with that said, we're going to open it up for the remaining time for questions. So I'll turn this back to Todd.
Great, thanks, John, and thank you to all of our presenters today. So let me move on to this. I'm actually going to pull this PowerPoint back up. So what I'm going to do is, with leading this, as I mentioned in the beginning, some of you would ask questions upon registration. However, if you have not, I'm sending out a prompt to the meeting right now to submit any questions. There are only a few moments left, so we probably won't be able to get to too many. However, we do plan on reaching back out to anybody who attended with all of the answers to all of the questions asked. So I'm sending this out right now. So that should have just come up on your screen. It's with a program called Polythrough Team. And feel free to enter your response. It'll be completely anonymous. No one else in the meeting will be able to understand or to know what question you asked. So moving on to the first question asked upon registration for any of the panelists to answer. This was covered, I think, through the broader portion of the meeting. However, nonetheless, how can a maritime company comply with the new ISM Code 2021, and with what elements does it integrate in the ship's SMS doc? Feel free if you would need me to repeat that question.
Okay, thanks, Todd. So, in response to that question, the team here has really crafted the show to take folks through the whole continuum planning preparation for cyber compliance here. I think most of that question has been answered, through the dialogue in the show, through the content. If there's any further question, we'll be sending out further literature in response to, the follow on to the webinar, with our contact info. So any more specific questions relating to that specific issue, just send over to us and we'll get back to you quickly. You can call us anytime. There was another question regarding vulnerability of technology in different sectors. We get this question all the time: how is maritime different? Operational technology differ from industry to industry, but really our approach in assessing vulnerability and creating solutions for mitigation, they're the same. The framework is standard. Our approach is the same for whatever operating system it is that we're assessing and analyzing. So, a lot of that will be done on a case-by-case basis, no matter who, is responsible for executing that. And again, in regard to specific technologies and use, whether it's navigation, propulsion, a myriad of ancillary systems, we can assist in assessing vulnerability inside individual systems or networks and assist you in, putting together technology solutions that way. Todd, any more questions yet? We're approaching.
There is a new question. I'm not entirely sure if it will be able to be answered readily, because it is very specific, but it's a very good question. So if you could share any assessment, report, or findings of the United States Coast Guard PSC cyber risk management inspection of a vessel that calls into U.S. port after January 1st, as per recently issued Vessel Cyber Risk Management Work Instruction, CVC WI 0271. That is a bit specific, so if we need to look a little bit more deeply into the policy for that, that would probably be understandable. But do any of the panelists have any answers?
Yeah, that is a good question. And, specifically, in terms of where people are in their, compliance continuum here, assessment obviously being the first piece. The assessment process, even the requirements have not changed dramatically in a long time. Like Frank had mentioned earlier, the requirement to assess technology and networks, was contained in the original regulation going back, 15 years. The guidance specifically in addressing and, formulating programs going forward has obviously evolved significantly. So we'll take that and we'll craft a response to that question with the team. There will be resources, evolving on our site, in terms of assessment approaches, different technical documents, pieces of technical information to assist folks in getting started here and putting this together. But again, maybe the best way as you get into your programs is to email us or call us. We're more than happy to answer, questions that you have and assist our clients in any way that we can.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. One just came in. So this question revolves around basically tech companies and themselves. So while vessel owner companies are forced to comply with these new IMO regulations dropped in 2021, how do cybersecurity hardware vendor companies need to comply to the new IMO? They gave an example. For a firewall or router produced by Fortinet or Cisco, do they need a specific IMO 2021 approval? Or do these new regulations fall solely upon the maritime companies themselves?
Hi, Todd. This is John. Let me take that. So, when it comes to the vendors themselves, it's really going to come down to your third-party vendor risk assessment, right? So it's up to the organization to really decide how they want to hold the vendor accountable, right? And that'll be a series of best practices. And it's a much deeper answer than we'll have time for. But you have to figure is the vendor, what type of data are they holding for you, right? Do they have intellectual property of the organization, or is it a transactional type of arrangement? Because that'll define how deep your cybersecurity policies will dictate for third party. That's really, if you look in the bodies, or you look through the IMO requirements and guidelines, you're not going to find something that is very specific to third-party risk management. But that's where the NIST cybersecurity framework and some of the other controls come into play, because there are subcategories that will help define that. And again, it really goes back to the organization to figure out the threat, right? So it always goes back to, what's the threat, what's the risk, what are the chances, and so are they holding my intellectual property or not? And that'll determine how deep we want to hold the feet to the fire of those vendors or manufacturers. But they'll be required to, provide, to do business with organizations. They'll be required to go through their own audit, their own third-party audit, right? So they'll have to answer questions for your organization. Things like, how do they safeguard your data? How do they safeguard, do they use things like two-factor authentication? These are all questions that need to be asked and positioned, to those different vendors of choice within an organization. You should have a third party, just as I mentioned before, with the SolarWinds, breach. You need to have not just a cybersecurity program for your organization, or you need to have a sub branch of your program that addresses your third-party vendors. So hopefully that helps provide a little bit of insight.
Great, thanks, John. Well, we are at the top of the hour. As we said, if you have any questions at all regarding this presentation or anything else that we at SPP do, please feel free to reach out. You can either continue to submit any questions in the poly, or feel free to reach out to info@getspp.com. You can also call our phone, which you can find on our website. It is 5631-517-3000. And I think that's it. Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for joining, and thank you to our presenters for giving us all this knowledge. I really appreciate everybody being here.